Welcome to the Lifeshine Generosity Project, where we promote reckless generosity. We encourage our guests to shine their light bright before others on their good deeds and glorify our Father in heaven. Today our guest is founder and president of Growth Source Coaching, Steve Smith. And Steve's back for the third time now, and I really enjoy this guy. In fact, I'm really excited about our discussion today because we're really going to dig into the economy and hiring and teams today and what kind of difference you can make with your team in your business performance. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back. It's good. I love being on this, so thanks.
Great. Well, so teams and the economy. Let's just talk about that for just a minute. Teams. We all know that a team, getting the best team possible, is going to give us the best result possible. We all would like to, if we use a sports analogy, win the championship.
That's right.
And fortunately, as a business owner, we all get to decide what that championship really looks like.
Right.
But again, it's all about bringing the right people and players into the organization. And this is a really tight labor market.
Yes.
So how's that affecting the team? And I know we have some things we're going to talk about later on what do we do and how do we make teams better. But how's that economy affecting the?
Well, in a normal economy, and I think for many businesses who rely on teams to produce what they're in business for, traditionally it was easy enough to find a capable individual, put them in the open slot, kind of wash your hands of it, and you're back doing your business. And today, because of the tightness of the market and how long it takes to find someone who's that right fit for that opening, it just requires a whole lot of planning and work in advance of eventually making that offer to somebody, because you don't have the luxury of just people all over the place ready to interview and accept a job. It's a tight market, and many times the talent that you want might be above your ability to pay for it. So now you've got to figure out, how do I structure that position so that it works well for the rest of my team and my company and be able to get the best that I can afford at that point in time?
Well, yeah, money plays a role, right? What can I afford?
Yeah.
We can't all afford to get all of the superstars on our team. Unlike the New York Yankees, who've always been buying their own teams.
Right.
All right, I had to throw that in there. So today we've got this tight labor market. Yet we're seeing interest rates rise, and we're seeing some changes. There's some thought that we might be headed towards a recession, which may flip that labor market a little bit.
Yes.
So understanding that might be happening, what's the best? Is there some strategies for planning, preparation? How do I deal with that?
Well, when you know you're headed into a recession, the first thing you have to look at your own business and say, how recession-proof is what I offer? Because not all businesses are treated the same in any kind of recession. Just like last year when we had the supply chain problem, some businesses were absolutely shuttered. Okay?
Right.
Other ones were up to their eyeballs in business because of the role they played in that whole giant supply chain situation. So when you look at recessions, not all businesses are hampered or restricted or shut down. Some of them can do equally as well. And I think part of the business owner's role is to be able to really understand the role you have in the marketplace and figure out, how recession-proof am I? And if I'm not, what is it going to take for me to weather this storm? Because we all know that after a recession, another boom will happen.
Right. That cycle is going to continue to happen, and you've got to move and shift and adjust. Now, the other thing I think is important here is that we're not talking about sort of the low-level technician type employee. We're talking about managers and leaders,
yes,
and maybe even C-suite. That's the type of person we're looking at. And again, finding them takes a little more time, takes a little more energy, takes a little more effort, and I know we're going to talk about what happens when you don't find the right one in a little bit, because that can happen. A bad hire is tough.
It does happen, yes.
Before we jump into that, though, let's just talk about, as I'm building the team, as the owner, if I'm a solopreneur, it's just me. I have 100% control, and I have a responsibility to myself to continue to get better and to perform at my best.
You have to manage yourself.
Right. But I have control over me, and I can do that,
Right.
So now I start to expand the business, and I start to scale, and I start to bring people on board, and I don't have as much control over them as I do over me.
That's true.
Right? And so when we look at that, and the reality is we don't get to decide when problems show up. And yet we want to build the best team that we can.
Right.
Using that sports analogy, we practice, we train, this is how we get better. What are some of the challenges that business owners are seeing in their management teams today? What are some of the problems that would maybe impact their ability to field the best team possible?
Well, one of the things that I see quite frequently is when people are looking to hire folks for managerial or leadership roles, they tend to focus on the technical functions of that role first. Okay, what is this role required? Is it logistics? Is it marketing? Is it finance? So they go after individuals that have those backgrounds and experiences, which is important. You should be putting somebody in that role that knows what that role requires. But many times what they don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about is, what are the cultural needs of that role? Okay? What are the human factor needs of that role? Because one of the biggest problems with people that ascend into management or leadership roles is whether they realize it or not, they're walking over a line that goes from, it was all about me, to now it's all about we. And
That's the team concept.
That's the team concept.
Right, because one player doesn't win the game.
And not everybody that moves over into that manager, executive leadership style role brings that attitude with them. So when you hire somebody that you haven't really vetted them clearly to understand, do they recognize that they are now having to derive performance not from themselves but from the team they oversee? That's a huge miss if you don't see that. If you have a particular culture about how your company operates, and this person either doesn't understand it or is diametrically opposed to it, those two areas right there can completely overshadow whatever expertise they bring to the role.
So so really, if we looked at the cause of this culture, and I agree with you, culture, they say culture trumps strategy every day. Because we have great strategy, but if we don't have the people to execute it, we're not going to get there.
Right.
So we're going to have culture, has to be a piece of it. So what are some of the, I want to refer to it as the causes of cultural issues.
Cultural issues most time have to do with what the company has already created. And one of the interesting things about cultural development is you can either be very acutely tuned into designing a culture that you want. Today, a lot of companies want more diversity, want more inclusion. They want companies that reflect more of society that they're doing business with, all right? But you can also be a company that thinks nothing about culture. You still have a culture, it just wasn't one that you created. It could be full of dysfunction. It could be full of people bringing their own kind of bad habits and strategies into the workplace. That still constitutes a culture, because a culture is just, how do we go about doing things on a regular basis? And so you either have one that you like or you have one that you got because you didn't pay attention to it. And so whichever one you have to know this is the environment that new people are walking into. Because remember, when somebody says yes to a job, they're saying yes to everything that they've been told to that point, their compensation, their role, all the other things that might constitute what they do. But they have about 30 days after they start to figure out, what team did I actually sign up with?
That's when they're going to find out for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You do your
and when
best
they
thinking.
find that out, then now all of a sudden they're really excited. They're going to bring their best work to their job every day. Or they might be stepping back and saying, gee, did I make a mistake? Here's an interesting fact about the Great Recession, the Great Resignation, rather.
The Great Resignation,
that took place during, kind of the second half of COVID. 40% of the people that left their jobs to take other jobs that either looked better or paid better were dissatisfied with the choice they made within 6 months of taking those jobs.
So the grass wasn't greener.
No, the grass wasn't greener. That's a huge margin of people that made a change for which a company had to adopt through orientation and training and letting them get used to what they were now doing, to all of a sudden have them say, gee, I think I made a mistake.
That's big. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. So examples, cultural examples, good ones, bad ones. Can you share a few?
I think a good cultural example is where you give your employees, your management teams, the opportunity to fail. because through failure is where people
That's
really
scary.
learn. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that's why not every company subscribes to this. But for companies that recognize that when you put people in positions of taking ownership and taking some modicum of risk and doing things that maybe the company needs to do but's never done before, the chance for failure is always going to be there. But if you restrict or retard or in any way let people know that failure can never happen, you're going to end up having people that are not going to be willing to stretch and reach and grow.
And you're going to be in a place where you're kind of stuck, right?
That's right.
Because they're not willing.
Nobody wants to take risks. That means everybody does what they're comfortable doing, whether it works or not.
Right. So there's no growth. It's
No
plateau,
growth. Right.
and we're just not going to get there.
So a culture that that supports the failure aspect, I think, is a good, strong culture to be in. Another culture that really talks about, do you know the people that work for you as well as you expect the return from them in their daily performance? Many of the companies I work with have very strict and very visible expectations about what they want their various people in the company to do. But most of them don't really understand the person that they hired, who may have been working for them for years. All of the individuals, regardless of where they are in the pecking order, they all have aspirations. They have futures that they're trying to aspire to become. They probably have certain things that they like. Some people like to be acknowledged for really good work. Other people don't really care. Some people want to make sure that they're compensated for the things that they do. Other people, once they get to a certain level and it supports their lifestyle, they're okay. But whatever that is, you really need to know the drivers of your people individually if you're going to help them acclimate to the culture you have and do their best work.
As a leader or a manager, you've
Yes.
got to understand what that is. So how are you going to motivate and inspire them if you don't know that?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So those are some good examples. Let's say that companies struggling with culture. They don't have culture, or the culture they have kind of was grassroots and it's not performing, it's not serving
Right.
them.
They've outlived it.
They've outlived it.
Right.
And again, if it's a culture of one, I can fix it, I can adjust it, right? But I can't fix it.
That's
if I-
called my individual personality.
Yeah, I can fix that. What are some strategies? What are some strategies that somebody could take to improve or change culture?
One of the things, and this is not new, this has been going on for quite a while, but when I get involved in these, I frequently find that the companies that do them don't do justice to them, all right? And the one that I talk to people a lot about is doing overall company engagement surveys. All right, lots of companies do them. Some of them are mandated every single year because they want to make sure that they know what the employees think. But past getting all the data in, it doesn't go anywhere. I worked with a company. It was
You got to do something with the data, right?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that what you're saying?
I worked with a company, a huge medical logistics company back in the middle part of the country a couple of years ago. And I asked them, I said, what do you think could be improved amongst the workforce that you know about? And they rattled off a long list of things. I said, okay, how did you find this out? Well, we do these company engagement surveys every September. And I said, okay, you've got 3 of them in the hopper now that you've learned from. What did you actually do that you could go back to the employees and said, we heard you, and this is the changes we're making? He goes, well, we haven't gotten to that part yet.
Wow. So again, big investment, no
But no follow-up.
return whatsoever, no
No
follow-up.
follow-through.
Right?
And so the biggest problem with companies that are trying to create or make shifts in their culture is getting the base, the broad base of people, maybe not the echelon at the top that's kind of part of making that change, but the bigger base that has to accept it and go along with it and actually promote it. They've lost so much trust along the way in terms of, okay, we can tell them what we think is wrong, but nobody ever listens to us, or nobody does anything about it, or next year they ask us the same questions over again. That erodes trust to the point where people just check out and say, you know what,
This is ridiculous.
Right.
We don't need to worry
Right.
about it. I had a client that used to take everything and put it in the inbox, and he would just leave it there. He wouldn't look at it. He wouldn't do anything. He says, if nobody comes here within the next 30 days to talk about something that's in that inbox, it's going in that round trash can.
right, because that means the problem is over with.
Because I get
right?
new stuff coming in all the time,
Right.
but nobody's following up with
Right.
it, so it really doesn't make sense for me to spend any time on it.
So what I tell companies, if you're going to do this, because you've done it in the past, or maybe it's something, a tool you're going to use for the first time, have an entire process of not only gathering the data, but putting little teams together to evaluate the data and come up with recommendations.
Do something with it.
Right. And look, most people that get involved in these, they know that they're not going to get 100% of what they're telling companies. What they really just want to know is, did something change as a result of it? Did something get better? Did some problem that all of us at the ground level have been seeing for years finally get recognized and fixed?
So, we go back to generosity, because this is the Lifeshine Generosity Project. And I think, we don't have to do anything, right? But if we employ that generosity, in your particular case, we survey, but then we take action.
Yes.
Right? We don't have to take action, because many people don't, right? And we complain maybe about our results or we're not improving, but we don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
The generous approach is to listen and hear and apply and take action, right? The generous approach is to get to know the person and find out what is it about them as
Right.
a person, as an individual. I don't have to. They can just be a cog in the wheel. They have to do X, Y, and Z. That's all I want. I don't need to know them. But the generous approach, which leads to better results, is to get to know them.
All most people in any dynamic organization really want to know is, do the people above me recognize the value I bring to the company, and do they care about me as an employee? If you can satisfy those two things, you have made massive strides in employer-employee work arrangements. Because most of the time, employees that recognize that the owners are really trying to do right by them and are trying to provide them with a meaningful environment to work in and a position where they can contribute, where they can actually see that what they do helps the organization be
Makes
better.
a difference. Makes an
They will
impact.
forgive all kind of small
Oopses and
bad
mistakes.
behaviors of all kinds, yes. And that's just human nature. But when an employee wakes up one day and realizes, these people don't really care about me, I'm just occupying a spot, and if I left the planet tomorrow, somebody else would be in that spot, that's when they check out. That's when you have real problems on your hands.
Okay. Yeah, so culture and changing that, and again, I think generosity fits totally into that space. It's just a mindset. How do I make this better? And it's relational, right? It's generosity towards people, and how do I make a difference? If we shift that discussion just a little bit, I'm the leader, and I've got my team. How do I know that my team is performing as well as they can be performing? How do I know? How do I go down that direction?
Well, performance expectations are an interesting area all in themselves, because at the core, it requires that both parties understand what's expected. And you as a manager, a C-level individual that oversees some big portion of a company, can have very, very specific expectations. But if the people reporting up to you don't know that, you're going to have conflict. By the same token, if you're running an organization and you haven't defined your expectations clearly and simply, you're going to have conflict. People, most of the time, and look, there's no 100% in any of this stuff, right? But the vast majority of people who think highly of what they contribute in their job to the company they work for, they want to do well. They want to meet and oftentimes exceed expectations, because it makes them feel like they're a valuable player.
It's a nice segue right into training, which is where I wanted to go. And when we talk about training, I mean, if you don't know how to do something, you need the training on how to do it. And then I look at coaching, because I know this is really your primary focus,
Yes.
is really how do I get really good at that training? Because just because I know how to do something doesn't mean I'm good at it.
Yes.
I need to practice, I need to get some feedback. This is the same thing that happens on the soccer field, same thing that happens on the football field. They got to get some feedback about how to do it better, right? And they know how to do it, but they don't know necessarily how to do it well. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about training, and I think about the owner, the person who's running this business, and he's got all these people working for him, leadership team, management team, et cetera, how does the owner satisfy their need to know whether their team's getting the best, is growing as quickly or is doing the best they can?
Well, as you've already stated, to me, training is the delivery of new information. It could be towards building skills. It could be towards educating people on different ways of doing things. But it's initially delivering information that those people need to know about. And then the question becomes, what do they need to know about? So if you're looking at your entire team, you should be looking at the individual first and saying, are they up to par on all of the skills that's required at this level to where I know they're operating at a normal pace, all right? And through that, you're going to find people who might be deficient in things like communication or delegation or just organization and planning or time management. These are the things that
Pretty classic things.
I routinely get calls for,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes, though, the entire team has an issue that everybody needs training on. And the ones that I've been getting most lately are things like how to deal with conflicts. Because within a team, if everybody's really spirited and working hard and trying to get things done, inevitably you're going to have people getting together that don't agree on everything. And so conflict can arise from that. And it's not the fact that you should try to eliminate conflict. Sometimes conflict can be really good.
Sometimes it can get you to the next
Absolutely.
level.
The real question is, how do you get through it and still maintain respect and trust for the other person? All right. So that's one that sometimes teams need. The other one that I get a lot of calls for is just performance management. How do we as a team direct and guide and support the people we're responsible for so that we can get the most out of them? Because many companies today are still doing the same thing. They're having an annual performance review, usually around the end of the year, or if the company's on some, kind of a fiscal calendar, it's a month or two before the end of that year. That's the only time they have any real serious, heartfelt discussions about how that employee's doing and what they need to be able to do better. And so that model has never been liked by anybody. The managers don't like it, the employees don't like it.
Once a year doesn't
Right.
really serve the purpose.
It just adds an incredible amount of pressure to a very short period of time. And typically, everybody talks about what happened in the last 60 days because that's the only thing they've either documented or can remember. So a lot of people are looking for ways to get out of that, and one of the ways to get out of that is a system that has been adopted over probably about the last 5 or 6 years, and it's called performance management. It's the management of helping people with their performance throughout the year on an ongoing basis. It's having conversations that put people at ease about talking about, gee, I've never really done this that well and I want to do it better. How can I do that? And the manager provides them with some guidance or resources, but it's a much more collegial type discussion on an ongoing basis so that everybody feels like, number one, it's okay to fail, and number two, if I need something and I tell them that I can do better if I get this, I'm going to get it.
So continuous improvement, I think that's the key to success.
Right.
And waiting once a year to get some feedback is really not what we
That
call
doesn't help
continuous.
no.
Right? That's not really working. And so really setting up a system for, and I don't know if it's probably not daily, maybe it is daily, weekly, monthly, more frequent feedback so that person can learn and understand. And then, applying giving them whatever training, whatever they
Right.
need so they can get better. Because as the leader, your team is the key, right? You can only do so much. There's only 24
sure.
hours in a day, right?
Right.
Your job as the leader, maybe the most important job you have, you're going to make a lot of decisions, but is to put that team together. Because the better the team is, the better the results are going to be. And so what's the training? How do I continually get those guys to improve?
Right.
And so I've got my team and I've got a training system, et cetera, and then somebody leaves or something happens. It's unexpected. It wasn't planned for.
Right.
I got to fill that gap. That's a gap. I got to fill it.
Right.
Right. How do I prepare? How do I make that happen?
Well, one of the philosophies that I was exposed to way back in my earlier career by a gentleman I'd worked with on a couple of different occasions, had a tremendous amount of respect for. He was the one that introduced me to this concept that anytime you have an opening in your team, it's an opportunity to upgrade the entire team. So what he was saying was the focus shouldn't be on plugging the hole. The focus should be on looking at the team as it stands and saying, we have an opportunity to bring someone in. Is plugging that hole the right option? Or is there something else we can do to fundamentally raise the bar for the entire team? And that might mean creating a position that has been needed, but for which you may not have had the budget before, and taking that open hole or that position and dividing it up amongst other people. There's all kinds of ways you can recreate the team with just the opportunity to add one person. And so I think that's one of the most important things that an owner can do right off the bat, is say, is there a better way to perform with this team?
Is there a better way to use our resources?
Right. Do we need the same 6 seats that we've been living with for the last 10 years? Maybe not.
So this person that leaves, I mean, we don't know why. They took another job. Somebody got sick and they had to go take care of them. There's any number of reasons why this happens.
They could have retired.
They could have retired.
Sure.
Right? But rather than looking at that as just a total downside, it can also look at it as an opportunity. This is our opportunity to restructure.
Well, and you talked earlier about just with the type labor market, it's so hard to find that person that's got the skill set and might acclimate to our culture and be able to get them at an investment we can afford, right? So one of the things you can do that can kind of deal with that a little bit is when you're looking at a team of people that are essentially running all the operations of your company. We talk about sports analogies, right? Well, before you get to the major leagues, you've got to spend time
in the minors.
Yeah. All right. Who's the minor league player that is behind each one of the people in those central management roles? Who can you call up at a moment's notice? They might not be 100% ready, but they've got the core skills. They've got the aptitude, the ability to learn on the fly and maybe work their way into that role. Okay?
And it'd be a whole lot better than not having anybody there.
Well, absolutely, because if your company is part of your culture, I mean, this is not new. This has been going on for a long period of time, but some companies pride themselves on promoting from within. If you get that reputation that if you're willing to occupy that AAA ball spot and wait for that position or maybe another position to open, okay, that's incredibly powerful. And it creates a lot of loyal employees because people will wait if they know they have an opportunity. The ones that leave are the ones that look at the landscape and say, it doesn't matter how long I'm here, there's not going to be an opportunity.
There's nothing here.
Right.
There's nothing here. Yeah, so looking at that, unexpected shift, change, that's, what's the old saying, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah,
right?
That seems to be a good strategy for our politicians today.
Well, same thing happens, right? When somebody leaves, somebody retires, something happens,
Yes.
It's a little bit of a crisis in that organization. You've got to figure out what to do, but it also represents an opportunity.
Yes.
So I think that's pretty exciting that you can look at it from a different perspective. And then I think generosity flows in there as well. This concept of hiring from within or making sure that your team is trained and ready to move up, to step in and get on the field when that event happens. I mean, that's...
Well, and in talking about generosity in this particular environment, for people that are at the top of organizations that spend any reasonable amount of time playing out the chess game. I learned how to play chess at a very, very young age. Of course, I grew up over in England at a time when there was no technology to occupy your time.
So it was I'm very familiar with that time.
A lot of puzzles, a lot of board games. My father taught me chess at a very young age, and what stayed with me, because I don't play it a lot anymore, but what stayed with me is the whole idea that the best thing you can do is be able to anticipate things 4 and 5 moves down the road. The
right.
strategic look.
The farther you can see.
Right. And if you look at your whole team and say, wow, I've got a great team here, everybody thinks about this. Gee, how long am I going to be able to hold them? At what point is a competitor going to try to poach one of my best people? Or is something tragic going to happen that forces them to leave the role and go do something else because their family needs them? In any of those kinds of situations, you've got to anticipate that that's probably going to happen. Sure.
Yeah.
So when it does, what can I do? What can I put in place today and start working on today to mitigate that problem and maybe turn it into a real opportunity for someone else in the organization?
Yeah, I think you're planning and strategy several moves in advance. All right, so the other side of this, the other potential is that I got a gap, somebody left, something
Right.
changed, and I really don't have the right resource, and I got to bring somebody else in from the outside. This happens,
Yes.
right? Not everybody makes a good hiring decision.
That's right.
So if we don't make a good hiring decision, and I encourage everybody to do all the work they can possibly do because it's so expensive and painful. But let's just say that we don't. I don't. Right? How do I figure that out early? How do I figure that out fast? The mismatch fast.
I'm actually working with this in 2 different companies right now, and they brought on a senior individual who was very much needed. It wasn't like a position you could say, oh, gee, we don't need that. It was needed. And they brought on individuals that were really, really well-heeled in their function. They had a lot of good experience. They'd worked for really good companies prior. They knew the role. What they didn't anticipate was the attitude they were going to bring with them.
Oh, they brought their own culture.
Right.
They brought their own baggage.
Right. And
Yeah.
in some cases, it's a prior culture. In some cases, it's this feeling of elitism. I'm coming in here to fix you people. In some cases, it's just bad behavior that nobody ever called out before, and it just followed them into their new role. And so, typically, what happens, and I can't tell you how many times I've had people tell me, in hindsight, I should have done something faster. But typically, the whole idea is, well, let's not rock the boat. Let's just let it play out, and maybe they'll get in the groove of who we are and how we operate. All right? Never a good move.
Well, I think you got to follow the model. It's hire slow and fire fast. So as soon as you find something
even
that's,
before you get to that firing process, the one key leading indicator you can get is the other people in your organization that have to interface with this person. 9 times out of 10, if you've made a bad hiring decision, they're going to see it first. And many times, if you have good relationships with these folks, or they feel the culture is an open environment where you can express things that you see that you don't feel are right, don't do the disservice of not listening to them.
well, this is that whole generosity, pay attention to your employees concept, right? We
Right.
covered this a couple times today.
Right.
I mean,
Isn't
it's
it amazing how it all kind of
it's all
back?
connected.
Right.
And staying in tune with your employees and getting that feedback.
Get
you
the
know?
feedback, and it might even mean that within this 30 to 60 day mark, you sit down with the individual, and maybe it's not a formal progress report, okay? Maybe it's just a check-in. How are you doing? What things do you feel like you've acclimated to pretty quickly? What things do you feel like you're struggling with, or maybe weren't what you expected? Because most of the time, struggles are not real deficiencies. They're a mismatch in expectations.
Mm-hmm. I thought A and got B.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And so you want to provide an environment where you can have that conversation and get them to recognize and be able to verbalize to you, this is something I didn't see coming. I wasn't thinking about this. This has now become somewhat of an issue. If you can get them through a conversation with you to recognize that, you have probably the best chance you're going to have of taking an employee that looked strong when the offer was made, is now kind of veering off course, and maybe getting them back on course. But if you don't go through that and you just let it run thinking it's just going to play out, it never plays out well.
It never plays out well, right? That's the failure to learn curve.
Right.
It just never changes. You've got to take a different approach.
Right.
So this is, okay, you recognize it's a bad hire. Your employees, the rest of the team's giving you some feedback, right? And you kind of probably, well, definitely not happy, maybe angry, maybe frustrated. How important is maintaining a positive outlook, feedback in that space?
It's my opinion that through the entire process, no matter where it's going and how ugly it's looking in the moment, you have an obligation to that new hire and to the team that they're overseeing and to the organization to always look at a positive outcome. What can we do to improve? Because as the leader, as the company owner, your attitude is reflected, whether you think you're hiding it or
roll
not.
down.
It's out there. Everybody takes their cue from you. So the minute you've given up, everybody else is scratching that one off the list. You have got to maintain we can get through this attitude till it's 100% clear that this is not going to work.
Or you've figured out what the change is that allows you to
Right.
move on.
Right.
And as a leader, once again, we're trying to make good decisions, best team, and is it ever the case? That's got to be the case where the leader is not the right person to be making those kinds of changes. They don't have the skill set, right? So when do you go outside?
I think you go outside when you realize that the people that you have, maybe that have queued up, that are aspiring to move up in that area of the organization, where the time gap is way too long. Where under the best of circumstances, your best player, it's going to take them maybe a year and a half before they could even get into that role and survive it. I had two situations in my 30-year career in consumer products where I had to stretch and work into a role that I was asked to step into. And it was definitely a role that I wanted, but it was not one that I was always prepared for. And I mean, that takes a lot of fortitude. And you've really got to be in love with what you're stepping into, or there's too many opportunities to say, this isn't going to work, I'm going to
The stretch, and the stretch is, personal belief, the stretch is always good. The question is, how big a stretch is it?
Right.
Right? So if
if
it's a
you've got
reasonable
role,
stretch.
Yeah, if you've got somebody in a role and you haven't had time to put your plan together, and you don't have any viable people that could step in and make that stretch without completely failing and being defeated, then you got to go out and look.
Right. I'm going to go back to another concept in this outside. So in this case, back to our story where we've brought in somebody that didn't work out, right? And as the leader, I might not be the right person to try to right that ship. It might not be my skill set, right? Is there a time when I should go outside and bring somebody else in to help resolve, see if we can't get there?
I think that's always something that companies should consider, and that goes on plenty of times. But I also think that many times the leader of the organization can look at other people at that same level and find a mentor for that individual. That does two things. One, it keeps it in-house, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you try. Like I get into this conversation all the time. People, they want coaching, but they don't want other people knowing that they're being coached, because the mentality out there is if you
You're
have
deficient.
to have somebody coming in from the outside to help you, there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and it's you. And nobody wants to know that. They don't want their reputation tarnished because other people think they're broken and somebody's coming in to fix them. So a lot of times I'll recommend to companies, do you have a senior individual on your staff at that level that can mentor this individual, that can bring them aside and have that rather unvarnished conversation? Say, look, I can help you through this, but you got to realize you can't do this anymore. This organization doesn't allow that. And because you're talking from a peer-to-peer standpoint, a lot of times those people will take that countenance. They'll say, okay, I get it, because it's not they're not being legislated to by somebody above them. They're being guided by somebody that's at their level and has been there and has seen what happens when you do that kind of thing.
Really valuable connecting with somebody who's been there and has seen that. We're going to run out of time here, but I want to have one more topic, right? So how should we, in the sports world, having a coach is positive. If you're a golfer, you have a golf coach, you have a strengths and nutrition coach, you might have many coaches, and for any sports, right? And coaches are looked on as favorable, and the best players have the best coaches.
Yes.
Why is it in the business world we think that's an error? Why is it in the business world that I think I'm bad
if I had
I want to coach?
that,
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
well, I think it's because in the athletic world, what you do as a job is viewed by thousands, maybe millions of people on an ongoing basis. So they see the benefit of your improvement, whether you're a pitcher, a first baseman, whether you're a goalie, whether you're a quarterback, you're in basketball, it doesn't matter, but your fans will be the judge of how good you are, okay? In the business world, a lot of these positions are kind of cloistered. They're known by people within the organization, but sometimes they can be masked, and the customers that company provides service for year after year after year may never realize the turmoil that's going on the inside. So people have a tendency to look at that and say,
They can hide.
yeah, I mean, I may not be doing this well, but I'm making my numbers. I get that from salespeople all the time.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'm making my numbers.
I'm making my numbers, so that should erase all the other bad stuff that I create that people don't like in the organization. So I tell companies all the time, say, look, the best time to bring in a coach is when you need help in an area you guys aren't experienced in. Sure, everybody needs to communicate in the organization, but if you guys, if your communication style isn't good enough to be able to raise the bar for everybody, maybe you need a new approach from the outside. Somebody that can come in and not get caught up in that culture and kind of immediately feel like they're being sucked into it. They can bring in a new way of doing it and help somebody rise above the challenges that they're facing. So a lot of times people bring in people from the outside because they realize they've run the gamut on what they can do internally.
Well, I think that makes total sense. And I think what you're talking about is human behavior. You know, it's hard for us, especially if we're in a role and we're successful, to say, you know, I need more. I need to be better. But at the end of the day, I still think whether you're in that sports environment or you're in that business environment, there is always room for improvement. There's no such thing as perfection.
Right.
And that we should always try to be the best that we can be. And sometimes that means bringing a coach in to help us through it.
Yes.
So even if you're good at communication, can you get better? Certainly can. Even if you're good at managing your time and your organization, can you get better? Certainly can. So never stop.
Well,
right?
and look, a lot of times people will say, I can always get better. I get that quite a bit. And so sometimes you might put yourself through some webinar series or online training to get exposed to better practices. So that might say to the community around you that you're working on that area, okay? The big difference between training and coaching is that with coaching, there's an expectation coming from a third party that you will do the work to be better. Not just
that accountability factor.
Expose yourself to information that might make you better. You're now being held accountable for doing what you've learned on the job in a daily routine to become better.
And you're probably measuring it to make sure that
Right.
you're actually
Or you're getting feedback about what's working and what's not, so you're always on that path. So you can't leak off and forget about it and 30 days later, say, oh gee, I was supposed to be working on that. Coaches don't let you do that. They hold you accountable for doing the things that you tell them you want to get better at, so that your muscle memory changes, and now you're in that focus of, okay, every day I've got to do this because it's helping me, not just telling people I need to get better. I'm actually working on becoming better.
Right, everything is stimulus and response, that little space and time in between.
Right.
I get better at that time right there, I get better responses,
Right.
I get better results. So, and I really thank you so much for being on the show today. I really love the theme of generosity that has shown up again and again and again in terms of achieving better culture, better performance, better activity. Thank you so much for participating in that and sharing in that.
You're welcome. I enjoy these. I appreciate you having me back.
We'll have you again, I'm certain. Thank you. All right, wherever you are, thanks for joining us today. If you would please scroll down and leave a comment and push that little subscribe button. That would be really helpful. If you'd like to participate and join us online, you can do that through our website, www.lifeshine.com. And just in closing, I wish that your light shines brighter every day on your good deeds so that you can make a difference and glorify our Father in heaven.